Welcome back to Extra Blue. I'm your host, Elena Soneson, and I just flew across the ocean and made it all the way up north to Munio, Finland, where I am getting back on snow for the first time since March. I'm really excited to be here despite the darkness in northern Finland this time of year. The man-made loop of 5K skiing is right out my door, and it is such a treat for me, and I can't wait to get this winter started. On this episode of Extra Blue, I welcome U.S. ski team strength coach Tschana Schiller. Tschana's official title with the U.S. Ski and Snowboard is the Director of Athletic Development, but we all know her as T and as the leader for all things related to strength for cross-country skiers in the U.S. T has been with the U.S. ski team for over 20 years and has brought so many insights into the philosophy of strength for U.S. cross-country skiers. She works with athletes like Jessie Diggins and Schumacher, but really her strength concepts get trickled down into clubs all across the country and are incorporated into many young athletes' programs today. On this episode, we are diving into what skiers of all ages and abilities should be focusing on and how to get to the start line feeling like their strongest and best self. We talk about where the areas of focus should be for young skiers in high school or starting college. We then talk about the time-crunched athlete and how they can make the most of just a few minutes out of a jam-packed schedule. Finally, we talk about the secrets behind strength training for World Cup athletes. And guess what? There is no secret. So I hope you enjoy this episode with Tschana Schiller. This podcast is powered by Gear West, a specialty sports campus which has supported and inspired me for years. If you're near Minneapolis, their incredible 25,000 square foot store is just about 5 minutes west of Ridgedale and offers the largest Nordic selection in the country. And no matter where you are, their website is a fantastic resource for learning, motivation, and the gear. Everything you need to chase your goals in Nordic and alpine skiing, biking, running, and all kinds of cross training. Check out gearwest.com. I'm super grateful to have their support, and as a reminder, you can now watch these episodes on Gear West's YouTube channel. We have Tschana Schiller on the podcast today, also known as T. T, you have been with the cross-country ski team for how many years now?
Oh, I am coming up on to 20 years. I started in 2006, so yeah, end of next year or middle of next year will be 20.
Yeah, wow, that's crazy. Well, thank you so much for being here with me on the Extra Blue podcast. How are things going in Park City these days?
Yeah, it's the weather's starting to come in. It's raining right now, but maybe turning to snow, so winter is coming in quick.
It is coming in quick. Nice. Are you excited for that, or are you like trying to hold on to the last bit of fall?
I love fall and I love mountain biking, so it's always a little hard when it
Oh,
goes, but I love skiing as well, so bring it on.
yeah, very cool. Tschana, you work at the COE as the Director of Athletic Performance. What does a day in the life of Tschana look like these days?
Oh boy. Yeah, so a director of athletic development actually. And so I oversee all of our ski and snowboard disciplines. And so I work specifically with Nordic, and so I program for them. But in here usually around 8 a.m. and checking in with all the teams that we have on the floor, all the athletic development coaches, working with the rest of the high performance team, sports medicine, any of our rehabbing athletes, developing protocols and recovery and projects and testing. And so my day is kind of a mixed bag. When the team is here in town, I might go and get out with them outside. And so that could be on a mountain bike ride or a trail run, or go and watch them in their element skiing at Soldier Hollow, or our other disciplines on the airbag, things like that. So it's a pretty unique job in that yeah, every day is a little bit different, and then I travel on the road a bit too. So yeah, it's quite fun.
Yeah, it keeps things interesting for sure. Do you have a favorite, I guess, like part of your job? Are you most excited when you're in the gym with an athlete, getting them through a workout, or are you more excited about like putting together the strategy behind what an athlete is doing while they're abroad? Or what's your favorite aspect of that type of job?
Yeah, I find myself at my desk a little bit more often in the role that I have
Oh,
currently, and kind of managing some other things. But when I do get on the floor, because again, the cross country team that I work with is mostly remote. They're not here in Park City,
mhm,
so a lot of my coaching is remote with them. But when I do get on the floor, when the team's in town, that's probably when I'm the most lit up, is it when I get to see the program that we put together, like being done and the athlete progressing and things kind of
yeah,
coming to fruition. That always makes me super happy. Like I just love coaching. I love being out
yeah.
there, seeing what's going on with the athlete in real time and making adjustments and yeah, just being a coach.
Yeah, that's so fun. Well, you have done an incredible job of developing all these athletes, and you have worked with athletes anywhere from, a developing high schooler to an Olympic medalist. And I'm curious then, what first drew you to strength and athletic development from the beginning?
Yeah, I was a collegiate athlete. I played soccer in college, and I was studying exercise science, and I just always loved the weight room. I had really great coaches, really great mentors in the weight room, and I was kind of going back and forth on what I was going to do with my degree. Thought about going into PT and or medical school, and when I was finishing up soccer, my coaches were like, "Hey, you want to do some grad assistant work in the weight room." And at that point, I was going to stay at Northern Arizona and go into my master's degree. And so I was going to be a grad assistant, and so I kind of got taken under their wing. And then I just really loved being in the weight room, and I loved how much it gave me as a soccer player. I felt the difference it made for me. So
Hmm.
um, I kind of went that direction and then ended up getting an internship. So I left NAU, didn't stay for that grad assistantship or master's, and came here and basically got like 2 years of applied sports science in this high performance department, which was one of the only in the US at that point. Like we just didn't have a huge presence in the US in like high performance and sports science. So, and I had some amazing mentors here, and the rest is just history. I just loved like seeing what's possible in human performance and coaching athletes. And in many different sports. I've worked with team
Right.
sports in college, and then all the ski and snowboard disciplines, and just like understanding an athlete's goals and where they're at right now, meeting them where they're at, and trying to figure out how to help them get to where they want to be.
Yeah. Well, you've worked with, again, so many different athletes at various stages of their career. And it sounds like you were very interested even when you were an athlete as well. So I'm curious, has your philosophy around strength from the time that you were a soccer player or at NAU to now, has it evolved over the last few decades, I guess?
I would certainly hope so, yes. I think we're always continually evolving and changing. You come out of, at least I came out of university, and you have a lot of book smarts, right? Like you go through your degree, everything. It's like you learn from the book. And then you start to apply it in the real world setting. And so then you start to build your experience. Um, and then you're actually working with humans. And so what you learn in the books doesn't always happen the exact same way well,
Right.
most often doesn't happen the exact
Yeah.
same way when you're working with an actual athlete and their logistics and their needs and all, there's just so many pieces. And so, this perfect plan, they're like, oh my gosh, this is exactly what, I've learned in school. And then you go to apply it and the entire thing implodes. So I think in that way, for sure, you're always kind of adjusting. And then I've been able to work with so many amazing coworkers here at USC and Snowboard from all around the world. Just absolutely brilliant minds, sports scientists, athletic development coaches. And they have different techniques and viewpoints and things like that. So that's definitely helped to, continue to build my philosophy and where I'm at. Ultimately, I look back and I'm like, hey, like, I want to make sure that what we're doing is I always like we want to do simple better. Like it doesn't
Mm,
have to be some complex thing, even at this level that I'm working at. Um, the fundamentals are really important, and so that's something that like keeps coming back year after year after year. That there's like fads and there's trends and things that you experiment
right.
with, and you're like, oh, that doesn't work, and then it goes away. But the fundamentals are so important. Consistency over missing or intensity, like getting like trying to get to the end point right away. Like, no, just be consistent, do simple better, and just have this like holistic athlete approach, because there's so many things going on, like an athlete's well-being and everything else, their mental side, all these things play into how they show up for that hour session with me. And so again, like that perfect program that you think you wrote might totally have to be scratched and thrown out for, something different, and it probably works a lot better. If the athlete's not going to do it or can't do it, then it's not going to work. So those are
Right.
just some things that probably I didn't know when I started out.
Yeah. Well, you kind of already answered my next question, but I don't want to assume anything. So, is there something that you wish every skier, no matter what level they are at, maybe understood about strength training, and then that translation to performance on snow and how that can kind of help?
Yeah. Yeah, a little bit in that last question. So obviously, like I'm trying to help an athlete develop into a pretty well-rounded, durable, robust athlete to handle whatever your sport is. So with Nordic skiing, like you guys spend a tremendous amount of time doing endurance work and in similar patterns in, whether it's skating or classic, but you guys get to actually do your sport for the most part. I know roller skating's different than being on
Hmm.
snow, but you guys are actually doing your sport most of the year, which is different than a lot of our other ski and snowboard disciplines where they're not on snow and they're not actually practicing their sport similarly. But so we're using the weight room to try to really handle the rigors of whatever you need to do in training and competition. Um, Unless your sport is weightlifting, so Olympic sport, weightlifting, clean and jerk and snatch, or you're a power lifter, squat, deadlift, bench, things like that, then this strength work is really supportive work. It should be, this supportive work. Your number one priority is your sport. And so that's something that I always try to stress to the athlete, like this is really to help, help you either helpfully become injury, less or more injury resilient, be able to train your sport harder or longer or whatever it is, because that's where you really get better. You're not getting better in the weight room at your sport, but the weight room work should help support that. And so that athletic development training really shouldn't take away from that, but it should work, in combination with it. But it really shouldn't be neglected either, because it is very, very important work. And if that's a bucket that needs to be filled, then for sure, like that's an area that an athlete can put some work into and see a lot of benefit from.
Yeah, I think that one thing that I maybe was, I guess, taught at somewhat of a young athlete age was one, that strength is so beneficial for a cross country skier, especially the upper body strength that, I come from a running background, so I didn't necessarily have as much upper body strength. So developing that in the years of, like 17, 18, 19 years old, that was a huge help in my development. And then also the aspect that strength can be such a huge proponent for injury prevention. And I feel fortunate that because I started doing strength, it wasn't anything crazy, but I started doing strength in high school. And I feel like I really, knock on wood, haven't come across many overuse injuries. And I've had little things flare up, but I am able to catch them and figure out, okay, well, what can I do here to strengthen? Like, where's the weakness in my body that's causing this injury to flare up, or maybe some little pain piece happening, and then I can kind of target, okay, well, it means that I need to strengthen my glutes or whatever it might be, or maybe my hip flexors or something. And I feel fortunate that strength can be used then as injury prevention and not just to get, stronger, more powerful as a skier.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I'm glad that you noticed that. I mean, when I think about programming, obviously, yes, I'm trying to think about, the performance side and the things that I can give an athlete that can hopefully relate to the characteristics they need to be successful in their sport. But then I'm also thinking about, and especially in cross country, what movement patterns are they consistently in? What are they not getting? Like I want to make sure like your best um availability is the most important. Like you need to be able to
Mhm.
train. So if you're not training because your shoulder is real sore, you got an injury or whatever, because you're constantly in this motion, and we're not looking at working kind of antagonist stuff, and
Yeah.
or just like dialing in a little bit of prehab work just to make sure that everything's kind of balanced out. Like sometimes we're doing exercises that don't, a lot of times they don't look anything like, a cross country skier or a
Right.
different skier or snowboarder. But there's an intention and a purpose that to hopefully again make sure that you're available to actually do your sport and get better.
Right. Right. Yeah. Well, I know that, thinking back on my development as a high schooler, I was juggling many different sports and going from running to skiing, still playing soccer when I could. And I'm curious how you think for high schoolers, how can they use strength to complement everything else that they're doing and not necessarily compete with it, as in like going into the gym and then being sore for their running race the next day or whatever, or maybe their soccer game. How can they balance this aspect of strength as a young athlete in high school?
Yeah, sure. No, that is a challenging time because a lot of athletes are playing multiple sports, which is great. I super condone that. That's wonderful. Like, I'm not a big proponent of early sport specialization, so the more sports they can build or work on, the better. You know, I think that sometimes people can think like, okay, I got to go do my strength training and it's got to be, 60 to 90 minutes and it's going to take me like you can rethink how you build these sessions in. It doesn't have to be in a weight room either. It doesn't have
Mhm.
it could be at home. It can be when you're out in the field, before you take a run or before you do your intervals. So some of the things that we might play with, even with the national team, is that yeah, typically they train twice a week, maybe 3 times, depending. Strength train with me, usually twice, and it's 60 to 90 minutes. But sometimes we might take portions of that training out and say it's plyometrics or something, and we get them. They're out on their skis that morning, and they're going to warm up on their tennis shoes. They're going to do a series of jumps, and then go ski. And so that portion got taken out, and you don't need any gym for that, right?
Mhm.
Um, Doing stuff again, like as a high school athlete, or a new athlete with a young training age, meaning they haven't done weight training for very long, you don't really need to get in a gym. Like you can
Yeah.
start out with stuff that you have at home, with body weight stuff, with circuited work, and you can kind of break up these. It doesn't have to be 60 to 90 minutes or 2 hour strength session. It could be, I'm going to do 10 minutes of some torso work, in the evening and some mobility. And I'm going to do some plyos here and like just little like mini sessions. So it's not so overwhelming because it
Mhm.
is really hard to get in, to like drive to the gym, get your session in. It's a lot when you have, such a packed schedule. So yeah, just breaking it
Yeah.
up a little bit, I think can be smart.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can kind of add, like you said, maybe 10 to 15 minutes of it each day, right? I think that some athletes that I've worked with as or been teammates with, they've been like, okay, I'm going to set, this goal to do 10 minutes of core every day. And it's just like that, breaking it up into that little piece is like, oh, that feels a lot more manageable than um, really trying to emphasize core or strength in an hour to 90 minutes. So just like you said, I'm curious though, for such young athletes in high school specifically, so again, maybe they haven't necessarily developed as much muscularly or in their movement patterns. I'm curious, is there, one really most important muscle group or movement pattern that you believe for young cross country skiers that it's really important to develop?
Well, I would probably answer this the same way, regardless of what sport you're
Mhm.
talking to me about. Obviously, like cross country skiing is a full body sport. Everything is working when you're skiing.
Mhm.
Uh, you guys are some of the fittest athletes on earth because you're using every limb, everything's going on. And there are important muscle groups, right? Like you definitely are using the musculature around your hips and your hamstrings, and your feet and ankles are really important. Your calves, your torso, that connection between upper and lower body, and how you transfer force. And then, like you mentioned, the upper body, our lats and our triceps, and things that we're using for pulling. And then, not neglecting, like you look at a cross country skier and they're oftentimes in this very anterior position, and so we're also not trying to forget about our upper back, mid back musculature. But overall, especially for and this is for early athletes and for even the athletes that I work with, multi-joint compound big exercises. When you're younger, you're gonna get a huge bang for your buck for working on that. And I think if you like, just like we don't like to early specialize in sport,
Hmm.
like trying to mimic sport in the weight room, is not usually an area I go to. Like at some points we will go to, okay, how quick are we moving? What ranges of motion do we need to get to in the sport? But early on, like just again developing multi-directional movement, compound movements, coordination in a variety of situations and position, just building up your foundation of in strength and power. Because like without adequate levels of those type of things, then later as you start to develop through your sport and say you've gotten rid of soccer and you've gotten rid of track and now you're a cross country skier and now you're honing in more and more, then and you get more sport specialized or you get into more high performance style training, then if you don't have that foundation, then you'll really be limited in its effect and that limited foundation for progressing to advanced training. So a lot of times if I do have an athlete that hasn't had a history of that, like we start pretty basic and we might stay there for a long time. And
Hmm.
it doesn't have to be overly complex, I guess is my biggest thing, especially if you are playing other sports too. So um yeah, that would be my suggestion.
Can you give some examples of what you mean by those multi-directional or compound exercises? What might that look like for someone, whether they do have access to a gym or can they do something like this at home?
Yeah, so any um like squatting, hinging, anything
Hmm.
like so compound, like ankle, knee, and hip are all going through ranges of motion rather than like a single joint movement where maybe I'm sitting on the leg extension machine and just doing,
Hmm.
quad work or something like that.
Hmm.
So really connecting like full body coordination. Lunge in multiple directions, right? Like so in cross country, we might have a lunge pattern in for most of the summer, and maybe in spring when we're just starting out, we're going multi-direction, backwards,
Hmm.
forwards, curtsy lunges everywhere. I just want their bodies to move in different ways than they are doing in skiing, in either in like the skating or classic direction. And so, or maybe we get to low box step ups in the fall, but we started with a rotational step up through a bigger range of motion in spring.
Hmm.
And so it'll just start to hone into a little bit more specific later in terms of, again, maybe the range of motion or the speed or the rate of force development that we're trying to work on. But early on, like squat, hinge, push, pull, upper body, push, pull, it could be, there's no right or wrong answer.
Yeah.
So it could be a press, it could be an incline press, it could be overhead pulls, it could be overhead presses, and having a few different, because again, that's just gonna make you more resilient and more robust or as you start to develop and get into more specific things later on.
Hmm. So I'm curious, would you say like I remember in high school just being told like you have to do pull-ups and tricep extensions or dips, like you get the pull-ups in, you get your dips in to get your triceps. Uh, would you, how would you rank those exercises amongst everything else that you just talked about?
I mean, they're great exercises.
Okay.
Push-ups, dips, any
You'd
like
include them.
body weight work like that, totally great. Yeah, absolutely include them. Like you have upper body push-pull work, um, some jumping, some rotational work, like how are you connecting with your body? How are you moving, crawling, like things you're like, why is this athlete crawling, right? Like, but they're coordinating. There's a lot of torso activation going on,
Right.
a lot of like joint stability stuff. So yeah, like again, there's no right or wrong answer, but looking at like the overall plan, like just again building up those building blocks so that later on, when you do want to achieve high levels of power output or whatever that might carry over more to your sport, like you have the strength built already in multiple facets, and you've hopefully built a really robust system. You can
Yeah.
handle it.
Yeah. Well, I do know that some young athletes, or even mature adult athletes do have a fear of doing strength or going to the gym because they fear of getting, quote, too bulky. And I'm curious, what's your response to something like that?
Gosh, Elena, I wish I wish that this myth would just slowly die off somewhere else. But it's a tough one. It is a really tough one. I want athletes to know or people to know that like putting on mass is a very specific style of training. And it also requires a very specific nutritional need in order to support putting on mass. So it's like if I have an athlete that wants to, then I program differently for that. And it takes a huge, like it is a ton, ton of work. Um,
Hmm.
I've worked with some other sports that are more gravity based that mass is really helpful. And the amount of volume and load and nutritional support that they need for that is like it's just a whole different program, right? So and this is one of the reasons that we've shifted from like, oh, you're a strength coach to you're an athletic development coach, because I think when people think of strength, they're like, I don't know, maybe you think of like the magazine you see at the grocery store and
Yeah.
it's like Muscle Mania
Bodybuilder.
and it's like, like I never want to get in the weight room because that's all it is, right? But which is not, because we're trying to develop so many different things as an athletic development coach. So we kind of just wanted to get away, from that like immediate association. Um, but so understand that the weight room or doing strength training, again, it doesn't mean you have to be under a barbell. There's so many different variations of strength training. But whether we're trying to increase a higher rate of motor unit recruitment or synchronization of those motor units or speed or power or coordination. The weight room is also like, especially for an endurance athlete, is going to help your bone mass, your bone mineral density, the connective tissues, so the tendons that are connecting that bone to the muscle, and making sure that we're trying to be as injury resilient as possible. So those have to be loaded a certain way. They either take like high intensity plyometrics or enough intensity or load to strengthen that tendon, because you guys are putting your bodies through a pretty big stimulus, pretty big demand. Um, there's also a huge hormonal response from the weight room. So what you guys do out skiing, endurance wise, or running, can be fairly catabolic to muscle mass. And so the weight room can provide a bit more of this like hormonal response in a more, yes, anabolic, but in a hormonal way that like you're keeping yourself healthier. You're making sure your bone is there, your bone mineral density, your muscle mass is staying, like because you still need that to perform.
Yeah.
And again, I'm not trying to like put an athlete like, like there are great coaches out there, and then there are some coaches that make it harder for the good coaches too, because you see things done in the weight room or you see people putting on mats or whatever it is. But that's not the way that, yeah, it should be. You should really look at that strength training as a way to really support your work and allow you to be a better skier, by getting more time on your skis and making sure that, yeah, you can apply that force the way you want it to, and you can do it effectively. The coordination is there, and you keep yourself healthy. That's
Mhm.
Health really needs to underpin it, and I think strength training is a really, really big part of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like one of the most kind of, I guess, pivotal moments of my athletic career is when I um, went from college skiing to more of the professional scene of skiing. And that meant that I was really focused on 2 to 3 really high quality strength sessions a week. And I was doing strength again in high school and throughout college. I was going to the gym and doing these strength exercises, but I felt like it was kind of this maybe afterthought, or just like make it happen when you can, which is still great. I was making it happen and I was still making gains from it, and it was helping me be injury resilient. But I feel like when I then had the time to ski kind of like as a professional, and I had the time to dedicate to these more in-depth strength sessions and really develop some of those motions that you just talked about, I feel like I was able to then create so much more power output in my skiing. I was able to apply so much more of the strength that I had into my skiing because that meant that I could get into a body position where my hips were forward. And I could do that because I had the strength and body awareness and body movement ability to hold that position. And I feel like that it took kind of years for that to really develop, which is it was developing all along and I was getting these strength gains all along, but it was really when I was able to kind of like make that shift into, okay, now I am a skier who can like use this power and use this strength. And it's just been really cool to kind of see that come to fruition now after all the hard work of strength training.
Yeah, I love hearing that. That's
Yeah.
exactly what we're looking for sure.
Well, I do also want to kind of segue into maybe the demographic of skiers who aren't in school anymore. They also aren't skiing professionally. They have professional careers or they have families that they're taking care of and they love to ski and they have goals to, finish a Berkey race or maybe get into the elite wave at the Berkey or maybe it is to, just ski 10K with their family on the weekend, but they love skiing and they are super time crunched because they are also balancing so many other things in life. And so I'm curious, like, what is your advice to these people who want to gain strength for skiing amongst such a busy lifestyle? And how can they stay strong with such limited time?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, similar to the answer about the high school athletes with so many different sports. And so kind of those same principles, right? Like how can you creatively get this in? It doesn't have to be some massive thing. You can get a lot of work done in 15 to 20 minutes. Um, I think consistency is really important, so trying to create a habit around it, like, and have a plan, so that you have that habit, you can consistently get in there, you know that this is your plan, and you can get your 20 minutes done, and you set it up ahead of time. There's no there there's so much information out there too. Like if you are at all like out on the web looking at like how to train this and how to get this and what supplements should I use and all, like it's like, well, you got to do it this way and you got to do it this way and you got to add this and like there's no perfect way to do things. So like
Mhm.
I think we set ourselves up a little bit for failure because they're like, oh no, I have to get sprint interval training and I get high
Yeah.
intensity, I gotta do this, and then it's like wow, it's like so much. So just I like simplifying it, making it a lot simpler. Create a plan, or have someone help you create a plan. Make a habit around it. When you get in the gym, if it is only a couple times a week, so like usually the intensity, so like either the effort or the load that you have in order to like really make a change in your strength, depending on the level you're at, should be fairly high enough to make a change. So again, like, but it doesn't have to be 6 sets of something. Like get in there, do a warm
Right.
up set, do 2 sets of something, and like make it really high quality and move on. Like just being consistent is gonna be a lot better than yeah, getting in your 90-minute workout once every so often. And yeah, the
Mhm.
consistency, the little habits will build a lot better.
Yeah, I even have one of my closest friends. She recently ran the Chicago Marathon and she kind of had this breakthrough performance. She finally broke 3 hours and it's something that she'd been working on for so long. And I asked her, like, what do you feel like made the difference this time? Because she wasn't necessarily following like a very strict marathon training program as she had in the past of doing, interval workouts and she made sure she got her long runs in, but she ultimately said, I really emphasize strength. And, she's almost 30 and it's like she's not a professional athlete at all, but she is an athlete who has a career and also is pursuing these athletic goals. And she was able to incorporate strength, 2 to 3 times a week, even if it was for 20 minutes each day. And she just felt like that was what made such a major difference in her ability to finally kind of break through and reach this goal. And it's really fun to hear things like that happen. But I'm curious then, like as skiers, maybe age, whether we're in our 30s, maybe into our 40s and 50s, what is most important for durability and speed on snow as we develop into those later years of our life?
Yeah, certainly. Um, similar to the question or answer before, but like again, multi-joint compound. If you want to stay, so our strength and power starts to decrease as we get older. Power and speed is probably the quickest stuff, right? And then like our bone mineral density, all these other things. So obviously we want to ski until we're,
Mhm.
in our 90s or however long, forever.
Yeah.
Um, and so it is still really important to get that strength training work in. Again, to have a stimulus or a load that's enough to actually create a change, whether, you're trying to get stronger or more powerful. So if if you haven't ever again like take this with I'm not prescribing a training session for like you got to understand who you are and where you're at your training, but if you haven't added in like plyometrics in your program at some point, like starting with some very very basic plyometrics, have somebody help program these for you, jumping type stuff, if you
Mhm.
are able, if you have again the strength foundation to support that work. And it doesn't have to be super high intensity plyometrics. It could be, simple things that have like you can start uh, with slow jumping and soft landings again, like and
Mhm.
start to build in your periodization, with longer, amortization phases. So between the concentric and the eccentric, just like safety wise. And then as you get stronger and better, like building in a little bit more intensity to those plyometrics, because that power does start to decline pretty rapidly. And we all want to be fast. We want to go to our 10K race, the local one, and do well and
Yeah.
maybe be a little competitive. And so, yeah, and strength force production is a big, big part of power. So that's also really important. So I think that like again, it doesn't have to be some massive program, like I might write a program that's 90 minutes for the national team, but that again, it could be a 30-minute workout and it could be a couple mobility exercises, three different plyometric exercises, a couple compound, a lunge and a hip hinge and a push pull and some core work. And like you could do it in a circuit, you could do it superset things to make sure that you're not lingering it on to super long time. So there's just a lot of ways to be creative about it. And if it's overwhelming and you don't know, like hiring a coach is a fantastic way to do it.
Yeah.
Let them take
Absolutely.
the work. It's got to show up.
Yeah. Yeah, you can just follow along with the whatever the plan says. You don't have to put any more thought into it. I'm curious though, because you talked about like, plyometrics a lot, or these jumps, and um, I know that there are some folks out there who still ski and they've also had a knee replacement. And I'm curious
Mm.
then, are plyometrics safe for someone who's had a knee replacement or someone who is having knee or joint pain? Um, is there something that they can do in moderation that is maybe safer for them to do, where they can still develop these explosive or high intensity movements without causing additional pain or trauma to those joints?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if you're dealing with pain or, obviously, like first and foremost, make sure that you're checked in with your doctor, like what is safe for you to
Mhm.
do. Have you, if you're still in physical therapy, asking them like, what can I now move forward with? So you don't have to leave the ground to develop power for sure. So sometimes we'll use banded work. And so you're kind of doing this accommodating resistance where the band gets more tension as you're getting in a more mechanically advantageous position. And you can kind of drive through without leaving the ground. Or like implement throws. So if you're trying to work on upper body power, med ball stuff, or things that like can actually be thrown or more ballistic in nature. We will, for the national team, the athletes that like doing it and are technically sound enough in their positions, that we will incorporate Olympic variation or derivatives. So maybe they do a clean or power clean, or maybe it's like a dumbbell variation, or maybe it's a kettlebell type of variation, something where they can move and implement with a little bit more speed and velocity, again, without leaving the ground.
Mhm.
If, or again, there's a whole level of plyometrics from like extensive, low amplitude plyometrics. You could do, I incorporate run specific isometrics, which are from Alex Natera, and it's in a joint range of motion. He uses it for sprinters, but I've kind of brought it in for cross country skiers as well because the demands are similar, the ranges of motion, the joint are similar. And so isometric to, again, increase this high rate of motor unit recruitment, synchronization, and then you kind of get into these like quasi isometric. So for example, you might be in a position in a squat rack where you're pushing against something that you can't move. And that is just allowing, again, you're pushing hard, 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 hard for a few seconds, and your body is saying, oh, Elena's demanding me to recruit more because this thing is not moving. So you're recruiting more muscle motor units, and the synchronization becomes to get more in sync. And that can help increase your force production and your power output. And then, there are ways to start to change that from an overcoming isometric to a yielding isometric where rate of force production is a lot higher. Again, all while not leaving the ground.
Hmm.
Doing things like if you're like being in the pool, you can
Hmm.
do plyometrics in the pool,
Right.
where you're pushing as hard as you can, but the pool, obviously, the buoyancy takes off a portion of your body mass. So that's a really nice way to do things too. If you're like, I just can't do things land based, I'm going to do it in the pool, and it has really good effect as well.
Yeah, that's a really good idea. I'd never really kind of considered the pool, but that makes so much sense now that you said that. I'm curious, are
It's a
there,
great way.
go ahead.
I was just gonna say it's a great way if you have become injured and you want to still get in some, if depending on the injury, like you can get into a pool and maybe still produce that concentric rate of force development and like get explosive, um, while while not having such a big impact. So there's a ton of tools to use for sure.
Yeah. I'm curious, are there common mistakes that you might see in kind of this time crunched athlete? So again, we're maybe in the career phase of life and family life, and we're just trying to make it happen when we can. Do you feel like there are mistakes that might happen as these folks are eager to see what they can do in structured strength, but they don't necessarily consider like the whole picture?
Gosh, that's a good question. I don't know if anything like specifically right away comes to mind. I mean, I think if you don't have a plan, that's a big one. If you're just like kind of going into the weight room and kind of fiddling around and figuring it out as you go, you can make some big steps by just having a plan. So that's important. And again, like these principles are not. This is definitely not rocket science, athletic development, or but like having progressive overload, adapting, recovering, not
Hmm.
always just going, I'm gonna go hard all the time. Make sure have that plan, build it up progressively, recover from it, assess it, reflect on it. Where do I want to go? What I want to do? Yeah, I think like simple things like that, and not trying to get too specific. Again, the weight room is general training. So you might think of like you're running or you're mountain biking as like general training for skiing, right? It's not skiing. It's not going to help you become a better classic sprinter, but it's going to help you develop, physiologically and maybe improve, your aerobic system or whatever you're using it for. The weight room too, I do think of very much as like it's a general portion of your training, and so yes, you might see things on social media of like such and such athlete at the top doing this exercise. It looks more similar to cross country skiing, but overall, like they're probably not showing you the 95% of the work they did that
Yeah,
looks just like everything else.
yeah.
Um, and how we start to progress that into more relevant becomes like, okay, now we're going to move a portion of this load at a higher speed, or we're gonna get into more similar knee angles that you get into with skate skiing, or tempos that we get into, or things like that. So yeah, maybe not like getting too specific too early. I
Mm,
think a good bulk of the work can be with just general work, good consistent general work.
yeah. And what I'm hearing you kind of say is it's great to go into a strength routine with intent and to make sure that there's maybe a little bit more somewhat strategy behind what you're doing and following a plan or working with a coach to create a program. And that is exactly what you have done for so many of these World Cup athletes through the US ski team. And so once these athletes have reached such a high level where strength, they can dedicate 60 to 90 minutes of time 2 to 3 times a week. Like they are ready to go all in. They've got the resources to a gym and the time to dedicate to it. What does a strength routine like that maybe look like in just a broad sense of is it anything crazier than what people are doing at home? Is it the same? Um, is there focus on general strength versus power versus explosiveness? What does that maybe look like once they have that full amount of time to dedicate to it?
Yeah, every individual has, again, like when I take in an athlete, we look at where they're at with their strength, where they're at with their power, where they're at mobility, where they're at with their fitness, where their conditioning, like all these pieces that they need. And we assess it and we look at, testing. So I have the capabilities of doing that and really creating a profile for an athlete. And then that helps drive where we go. But yeah, say they've had some history of training and they've built good foundation in their movements. Now, yeah, we might, again, like I keep saying, rate of force development. So um, taking not very many sports need absolute strength, like max strength. Again, unless you're a power lifter, right? Or maybe some other sports that like really huge efforts of strength. But applying a portion of that force, and can you apply, especially for Nordic, a portion of that force over and over and over again for certain durations? And, there are times in a race where maybe for 20 seconds, like your effort is really, really high, and then you get back into your rhythm and tempo and you get back in the group, and then you have to surge up a hill or at a sprint finish or out the start or whatever those pieces are. So yeah, at that point we are, you know, the fundamentals and the foundation doesn't go away. Those principles stay the same, but maybe you're just trying to like hone in and kind of sharpen the sword, and like how are we applying that force? What directions are we applying the force? What velocities? Um, and yeah, again, like if everything's kind of topped off, then strength training becomes a little bit more like, let's maintain what you have, and like let's spend as much time as you can doing your actual sport and the things that you need to do to get better there. Because I don't need to build an athlete up to be just these massive levels of strength and power. We need
Hmm.
enough to support
Hmm.
whatever the demand of that sport is. At that point, it's like, let's keep just refining it, and then make sure you can stay healthy. Let's make
Yeah.
sure you're injury free as best as possible.
Yeah. So are for most of the national team that you are programming for, are these individualized plans, from Jessie versus Gus? Are they doing similar things or are they completely different because maybe they have different strengths and weaknesses that they want to work on?
They are, for the most part, very individualized,
Yeah.
because again, each athlete is their own. Um, there's this, I kind of develop like a skeleton plan. I'm like, okay, here's where we want to go. But again, once I sit down with the athlete, understand their specific goals, their needs this year, what their summer looks like I have to take into account what kind of gym stuff they have, when they're traveling, their media, and then it's like that becomes individualized.
Hmm.
One athlete might want to develop power and need that because their strength output is already really good. So we're like, okay, like we're gonna maintain this, but we're gonna put a big focus. So for Gus, like I might, he's been working on contrasts and stuff way earlier in the summer than some of my younger athletes that I work with. I'm like, we need to just work on basic force production right now for quite a few months, and it might be multiple summers of that. And yes, we still develop the speed and the plyometrics and the power, but the emphasis is on something else. And then one athlete might have such and such injury, and so they have extra stuff that's helping, their shoulder or the hip or their ankle or their foot or whatever it is. Um, and so yeah, it is pretty individualized, I guess, at this point, certainly.
Hmm. And now, as your role as the director of athletic development, is there an area where you're able to kind of test or search for that extra 1% or 0.1%, whether through, technology or testing or different training methods that you have access to with the resources that, the US ski team has?
Yeah, I'm very fortunate and we get to use a lot of great resources. I definitely want, if I am going to implement something, it needs to serve a purpose and have, intent as well. So there are things that I monitor. I use velocity-based training tools to help athletes kind of automate or be a little bit more autonomous on their load. And so, especially with, these athletes that I work with are remote and I don't always get to know exactly what they did for their ski training that morning or in the days leading up. And I have 20 something of them. So I can create like, hey, I want you to move at this speed this week rather than saying, hey, I want you to move at this load or this intensity. And so if they're really tired, then the load will just come down and they can still work on the speed that we want to work on, and then vice versa. Um, with Nordic skiing, illness is a big thing, and so that's one of the things that we're always trying to make sure that our team and our athlete stays um, healthy. And so the communication, the tools behind, Aura rings and things like that to just make sure that the athletes are hopefully taking care of themselves in the recovery as best as possible. Um, let's see, projects we do, anything like I might have an athlete that comes in that's like, hey, I cramp a lot during longer races. And so at that point we're like, okay, how can we try to mitigate that for you? What might we look at for a tool, whether it's nutritional or training wise? And so we just kind of study that individual and then look out in the literature and see what kind of tech might be out there that might help the scenario. Or is this supplement working for me? Okay, well, let's test it with your lactate or blood pH or whatever we need to look at for that. So it is pretty cool because the projects that you get to do are pretty high end, and it is fun when you get to solve kind of something for somebody that um, has been interfering with their training.
Mhm. Yeah. It's very, very fun. And I've been fortunate enough to kind of chat with you about some of these things, whether it be about cramping or developing more power and speed. And it's been really cool to just pick your brain over the years through the World Cup ski scene and get to kind of see what I can do then to make improvements. And it does make a change. It makes such a big difference to have the strength, the power, the speed, and also, nutrition to support all of that. You talked about how even like bulking up, takes such an incredible amount of like nutrition and fueling just to make that happen. But also nutrition about cramping, what are you taking in a long race and things like that. It's all kind of related to one another. And I really appreciate all of your time today, Tschana. It's been really, really great to chat with you about strength for skiers. And I'm curious now, just before we kind of wrap up, if if a listener finishes this episode and wants to take home just one big change that they can make to their strength training tomorrow, or one really big key takeaway, what would you say that would be?
Oof, one thing, huh? Oh, that the I truly believe that the basics separate the good from the great.
Hmm.
So don't overcomplicate things.
Yeah,
That's my one.
absolutely.
That's my one quickie.
Yeah, don't overcomplicate it. I love that. Okay, final question. What is your favorite part about seeing athletes at any level get stronger?
Oh man. I think when you get a text message like middle of the winter and it's like, oh my gosh, that such and such training we did that was really targeting my, double pole sprint finish. it- I got my best finish, or I passed so and so, or like when they feel the difference, I think that's huge. Like I've
Hmm.
gotten text messages from half pipe athletes that were like, I landed so deep, not in the transition, and I didn't put my hand down and I squatted out of that because I've, committed to strength training and we've, gotten stronger. Like that's huge. That's really,
Yeah.
really fun for me. Like I love like I get up all winter and I watch all the races and But when something does kind of connect and you're like, oh yeah, like I felt the difference there. That's probably my favorite part.
Yeah, I think that's probably one of the favorite parts of the athlete too. And it's really exciting to have,
Yeah.
a PR in the gym of like, oh, I did, my most weighted pull-ups, or, I was able to deadlift this amount and I've never done that before. Those are really exciting moments. But what's really special and magical is when you then realize that that's translated to the snow and you're like, wow, I out sprinted everyone in the finish, or I made it up and over this transition way more powerfully or with more energy than I ever have before. So it's definitely a really fun part for the athlete to see that translate as well. And it's fun to then get to celebrate those wins with the people who help make it happen. So thanks for all that you do for strength training, for skiing in America. And I know it really trickles down to every age. It goes from the highest level, but those exercises, those movements, those philosophies really do get trickled down. So I appreciate all that you do for the sport and all the work that you're doing kind of behind the scenes at the COE that help make the magic happen in the winter. So thank you so much for your time today, Tashana. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me, Elena, and thanks for doing this podcast. It's pretty cool to see you doing this and spreading all the messages out to the nation. That's awesome. Congrats.
Yeah, that's the goal. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Extra Blue, and thank you, T, for sharing all of your wisdom with this ski community. Did you find anything interesting in this conversation? If you did, share it with a friend. Also, please consider giving this podcast a rating and review. It helps me grow the podcast and hopefully bring more awareness to the sport and some of the topics I'm discussing on the show. As I mentioned in my intro, I am in Finland getting ready to kick off the season in just a few weeks, and I can't wait to bring you all along for the ride. I've got some more great guests coming up, and you won't want to miss out. But in the meantime, I hope you all are having a great final prep period for what I'm sure is going to be a great winter ahead of us. So see you next time on Extra Blue.